Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Vanessa Maria Graber to discuss the cable franchise agreement. Lance Haver will provide an update on the water rate hikes. And Chris Murray will join us to discuss the recent success of our very own Philadelphia Phillies. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. The Phillies are doing great.
Oh yeah. I mean, Chris's birthday is coming up on the 13th of January, and the Orioles, the Baltimore Orioles, because Chris is from Baltimore, and the Phillies are going to be playing at Camden Yards.
Oh.
So he's planning on going down there to cover the games. And I'm planning on tagging along just because I like Oriole Park at Camden Yards and I want to see some baseball.
It's the best stadium in the business, as far
It
as
is.
But we have a lot to talk about on the show tonight, Denise. First of which, we've had a very busy week in City Council already. There have been multiple hearings each day this week. We're going to be writing about some of those for the newsletter at the end of the week. You have a couple you're working on. I have a couple I'm working on. There's a lot going on, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get to that, we're going to have a piece from Vanessa who's going to tell us a little bit about this cable franchise agreement that was voted out of committee today and will be voted on tomorrow in City Council and the following week for final passage. We don't have any reason to believe this will not pass, but here's a little explanation of what this means and why it's so important here in Philadelphia. So here's our piece with Vanessa.
All right. So Vanessa, we are here in the afternoon pre-show talking. We're in the City Council chambers, although you can't see it behind us because we have the background, but we assure you we are.
We are in City Hall on the fourth floor.
Yep. And we are talking about the cable franchise agreement. Tell us a little bit about what that really means.
So in the Cable Act, there is a provision for internet service providers, cable providers like Comcast and Verizon here in the city of Philadelphia to pay a tax to the cities where they provide services because they use public infrastructure in order to provide services. So, for example, Verizon, in this case, in order to provide Fios, uses the city's streets and sidewalks and has to lay fiber optic cable underneath the surface in order to be able to provide those services. And so this tax comes under using the right of cityway, right? So if you're using public infrastructure in order to run your business, then you have to pay a tax to the city. Now, these franchise agreements exist all over the country. And in other states, like Massachusetts, for example, there are hundreds of these franchise agreements because every town has internet service will negotiate it. And so we've seen some really big provisions in this tax be made in cities like Portland and Seattle and here in Philadelphia. And so again, this is all legislated by law. What folks may not know is that public access, PEG, Public Educational and Government Access TV, was not funded by our city for a very long time. It actually took 28 years for public access advocates to get that money released. So,
and our own Lance Haber was actually part of that back in the day.
Yes, and Gretchen Clausen, who's the executive director of PhillyCam and others at PhillyCam. And it's the reason why PhillyCam exists is because they were able to get the city under John Street's administration to release that funding for public access. And what has happened in many cities across the country is that the city will collect the tax, but then will not allocate it for PEG funding. And so in this case, the Verizon franchise agreement was negotiated in 2009. And so that's when PhillyCam first started. And it was a 15-year agreement. So it's 2004. It actually expired in February and was extended until August because they had not finalized it yet. And this time it's a 5-year agreement. Comcast, or, now it's Comcast Universal, which is headquartered in Philadelphia, also has a franchise agreement with the city that was renegotiated in 2015. And so that will come up shortly, I believe. It's another 15-year one. It will be negotiated in 2030. And so the fact that this one is a 5-year agreement is definitely interesting development. And allegedly, Verizon only wanted a 3-year agreement and the city wanted a 10-year agreement. So they wound up meeting in the middle with this 5-year agreement. And what the new franchise agreement provides when council finally votes it into law will be $8 million. And some of that money is going to fund public educational and government access television. It's also going to fund wireless access at all of the city's rec centers, which is a really huge development.
183.
Yeah, and this is a credit to the new director of the Office of Innovation and Technology. And also it's $500,000 for other grants for digital inclusion and whatever the city sees fit. So that's a question mark for me, because we don't know how that money will be allocated. That wasn't typically part of these franchise agreements, but in 2015, due to the advocacy of media justice organizations, they wanted part of that money to go to the school districts to make sure all of our school districts had wireless internet access, and also for what they're calling digital inclusion funds. And so that legacy continues in this Verizon agreement with this additional $500,000. So in the past, there has been a lot of lobbying against this tax, right? And getting the city to reduce the amount of money it collects for this purpose. And companies like Comcast and Time Warner and others, they have an army of lobbyists, right, that they send on here that try to renegotiate. And during that time, they try to defund public access.
Yes.
They wanted to make it $0 to use. But advocates fought back. And even though there was a cut to the funding to PEG, it was reestablished in this agreement. So given that not only did PEG at this time get funding, they also got an increase. And so from PhillyCam's funding, which is the P, the public in PEG, it went from $500,000 a year to $800,000 a year, which is pretty significant. The downside is the agreement is shorter, and so that longevity of a 15-year plan doesn't exist this time.
Right.
So advocates will have to figure out how to continue funding it if Verizon decides to move its operations outside of the city, which it very well could, because it really pales in comparison to the amount of customers that Comcast, right? Comcast is king here in Philadelphia, unfortunately.
Yep.
So there is a lot to be happy about in terms of, how these funds are, being allocated in this bill. And the bill number is 240383, if folks want to look it up. And it was introduced by Council Member Kathy Lozada from District 7. And there was testimony today from representatives from Verizon, the Office of Technology and Innovation, from PhillyCam. And it was surprising because the last franchise agreement hearings were so contentious that it was really a very calm and peaceful, and everyone was on the same page. So we
relatively short and
right
to the point. And the bill was made it out of committee unanimously favorable. It'll be heard tomorrow on Thursday for the first time, and then the following week again it'll be most likely passed. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be.
Yeah, and so that means there will be guaranteed funding for this. And we're just seeing across the country, in general, a trend away from funding public access cable television, because there is an argument that many or most of their customers are moving towards streaming sites, right? And even in some cities, they have canceled cable services because they have said they don't have enough of a customer base, and instead are selling cable services or bundles of different streaming apps through the streaming provider. So folks might have like Roku or Amazon Fire Stick or others. And so we didn't see that here this time. There's still a lot of cable subscribers in the city of Philadelphia, but that might change in 5 years, right?
You never know.
And if that changes and they feel as though they don't want to provide cable services anymore, they're only going to do streaming, then that doesn't fall under the Cable Act, right? And so they won't have to pay the tax. So now we wait for council to decide. It goes to the full council. And we'll also see how they're going to allocate the rest of those funds. Because again, $500,000 is a lot of money. I did talk with a representative from the rec centers, who was like the director of technology, and she was ecstatic. She said this was a huge win for rec centers in Philadelphia. They've been fighting for this. And in general, the public should just think about more ways in which they can advocate for big corporations like Verizon and Comcast to give the city more resources, right? They're certainly capable of providing more Wi-Fi spots, more access to internet, and they seemed happy to do so today. Right?
Well, it's good business, and I think there's probably also a tax write-off involved here.
Absolutely. So on that note, it's important to understand that Verizon's not actually paying this money. You, the customer, are paying this money. It works very much like the soda tax, where the providers pass the tax along to the customer. So if you get Verizon or Comcast cable services, you can see the charge on the bill for this tax, and the customer is actually paying it, which is another reason why they're like, yeah, look at all great stuff. But Verizon as an organization, they're not paying for that.
Right.
The customer is.
Right. All right. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for that. And we're going to look forward to hearing from you again soon about this and other issues as we start to close out the council season.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it has been a lot of theatrics up in here. So it was nice for once to cover an easy story with a positive outcome. Very little resistance to this. Of course, the folks at PhillyCam look, and we're representing because, Hall Monitor, in all transparency, airs on PhillyCam as well. And lots of people really excited and hoping that it passes in council next week. So we'll keep you updated.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. We'd like to thank Vanessa Maria Graber for joining us and giving us that report. And Denise, I have to mention something that just I found amusing about this bill. And maybe I'm the only one. They had to file an amendment on this bill.
Okay.
So the bill was amended on the floor. The reason why, they put a page out of order. So they had to amend the bill to put the page back in the right spot.
That is quite possibly the most arcane council rule I have ever heard in my life. And council has so many arcane rules that it doesn't make sense. But you're doing this over a page? Really?
I just thought that was funny, and I had to mention it.
That is funny. That is quite funny.
So we have some I think good news about the budget. We're being told by sources that we're closer than not close to a budget deal. If that is the best way to put it. That there's been a lot of movement over the last couple of days, and it looks like things are getting closer. So City Council has advertised some budget hearings. To pass, it has to go through committee like any other bill, right?
Right, to the committee of the whole.
And there's a hearing scheduled next Tuesday at 5 p.m.
Of course it would be at 5 p.m.
Right. The most inconvenient time for us. But that it may not be that day. They've also scheduled a couple other committee of the whole hearings next week and the week after, just to be prepared so they can just do it. And so it sounds like we're moving in a decent direction on that. It'll be interesting to hear about some of those big ticket items we keep hearing about: triage centers, street cleaning, the clean and green aspect of it, things like that we're keeping an eye on. So and one thing I think is very important: housing, because we've been hearing that maybe some of these housing projects that we've been talking about and hearing about things that were maybe holdovers from the Kennedy administration, maybe not going to get as much funding or any funding at all. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. We don't know yet. We haven't heard anything final, and I wouldn't say anything's final right now. I don't think anything with a budget's final until you have the final document.
Well, to be honest, the goal that council has is to have the first reading of the budget on June 6th, which could mean, and for those of you who have who have been with us through the budget process in previous years, particularly when we were all in pandemic lockdown in 2020, you used to have like the committee of whole would be called into session and then they would go into recess. And there were several days of meetings like that where they would just let you know we haven't come to an agreement yet and now we're out. So, it's not uncommon for council to set aside time for budget hearings in case it's necessary. But the goal they have is to have the first reading of the budget on June 6th.
Yeah.
So that it can possibly get second reading and final passage on the 13th. Now, if they don't make that target, if the first reading isn't done on the 6th, that means the first reading could be done on the 13th, which means another session of council would have to be added. And one thing that I'm hearing Council President Kenyatta Johnson is not interested in doing is having council go beyond June 13th. So it's going to be interesting to see, particularly in light of some of the stuff that the administration has done in terms of its relationship with council, if they can make this target. We're also hearing that the administration is going around the council leadership to talk to individual council members about budget priorities. And that's not bad per se, because sometimes what the leadership wants and what individual council members want could be two different things. But when you're doing this, when you're already having a bad relationship with a group of people, it may not be the smartest course of action. But we're going to be keeping an eye on it, and hopefully you all will be keeping an eye on it too, because while me and Larry, we go out, we cover this stuff, and me and Larry and Vanessa and Lance go out and we cover this stuff, in the end, it's your money.
Yeah.
And you really should know what the people who are in charge of deciding what to do with it are doing with it.
Yep. So the key takeaways right now, we're hearing that there's momentum towards having this done sooner than later. I think that's a good thing. That if it's a more harmonious process than what we've been seeing so far, I think that's a good thing. Denise, you're in the dark.
Yes, I'm in the dark.
The lights went out.
The lights went out. I think they're motion lights. Excuse me a second.
So that's where we are with budget right now. There you go. So we're hearing positive things about that. So now what we want to do is bring in our own Lance Haver to talk about where we are with the water department.
Good evening, and it's a good segue. The lights get turned off at Denise's studio, and that's symbolic or a metaphor for what water consumers are facing with the water rate increase. By the way, during the hearings, I was instructed to say it's not an increase, it's an adjustment.
It just looks like an increase.
Right, it's not an increase, it's an adjustment. They're adjusting the bills upward, which is, according to the hearing examiner, not an increase.
It is, yeah, it's an increase.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show how much they want to keep people in the dark. But before I start talking about the water rates, I am curious, was there any more discussion in council about Joyce Wilkerson?
I haven't heard anything.
No, but I'm also hearing from some of my council sources that the last word on that was not what the mayor did, even though she might think so. They've been looking at their legal options in this case from the moment that Joyce Wilkerson was handed the letter telling her that she could stay on the board. I don't think we've heard the end of this. And my guess is that sometime in the not too distant future, this will come to a head. What that'll look like is anybody's guess, but it is about to come to a head.
It seems to be another reason why the administration is going behind the council leadership to enter into individual agreements with council people. Just wondering whether that's part of the discussion. But we'll see. Hopefully you'll get some more tips and we'll get more information. So let me give the background for the water rates. There are many parts to our water bill. There are what they call the base rates. Then there are the rates for stormwater, which is the water that runs on your property into the street. It's now paid for separately on the water bill. There's the service part of the water bill, which is what you pay just to be connected, whether you use a gallon or you don't use any. There's the sewer charges, which is what we are charged for the water going back into the water processing plants and then being released into the river. And then there's something called TAP, which is the low income plan. And the low income plan is paid for by a surcharge. It's actually a tax on everybody's water bill. So unlike SNAP and LAHEAP and Medicaid, the way that we pay for our low income plan for water is by surcharging everybody else's water bill. So if you're not quite eligible for the TAP program, if you make slightly too much, you get taxed to take care of the people, and people desperately need help. But you get taxed to take care of that, rather than sharing the burden of poverty across the city, across the region, and across all of the community, meaning residents, landlords, commercials, industrials. We focus this solely on ratepayers. No other money goes into this. And that's including the surplus the water department has. Again, it has a euphemistic name, the Rate Stabilization Fund. And it has, we don't know how much right now today as we speak, but it has roughly $150 million in it. That money could easily be used to take care of the problem of people who are struggling or cannot keep up with their water bills. But as we see, as we go through the slideshow and I talk about this rate increase, even though, again, the hearing examiner wants it to be called a rate adjustment, we'll see that the rate board's public advocate is opposed to using public dollars, wants the bills to be covered by other ratepayers. Now, one more thing before I start. The way the hearings work is the water commissioner sends a letter to council saying, I'm seeking an increase. Then there are hearings set up, and there are public input hearings, and there are what are called evidentiary hearings. Well before there is an announcement of a rate increase, without any public notice, without any attempt to contact the public, the Water Rate Board hired Community Legal Services to be its advocate. And I say its advocate because that's very clearly what has happened. The Rate Board has said that there is no relationship between the public and the advocate, that the Rate Board is the employer of the advocate answers to the Rate Board, and the only people who can give direction to the advocate is the Rate Board. The public has no say. The Rate Board's advocate is so isolated and insulated from the public that it holds no public meetings, and its expert actually introduced its evidence as to why it wanted to raise rates. And again, the Rate Board's advocate expert testimony is rates aren't high enough. They want them to go up. They introduced that testimony before the public hearings. So the Rate Board's advocate, which claims to be the public advocate, didn't bother to ask the public what it wants, didn't wait for the public testimony, didn't wait to get any input, but decided that the public should pay more, and it suggested how much more. So I want to go to the slideshow because this is where it gets really difficult. How much more are we discussing? Well, again, if you listen to the hearing examiner and you listen to the Rate Board's public advocate and you listen to the water department, They say it's not an increase, it's an adjustment, and it's really rather small. But as you can see in the actual testimony, when the consultants get in and they write this stuff, they say how much it is. And they say the average bill, average consumer's bill, would go from $74.81 to $85.27, over $120 more a year, a 14% increase. Now, inflation has been very bad. It's really caused a tremendous problem for working people. But last year's inflation rate is going to come in at about 3.5%. 14% is 4 times that. So we're seeing the increase in the water bills at 4 times the inflation rate. There is no question, again, that we need to have a low-income plan. The discussion is around who should pay for that low-income plan and how should we run it. In the past, the water department was so inefficient and so incapable of enrolling people into the low-income plan that they could only keep about 13,000 people in it. During the hearings, I asked the water department how many people were in the low-income plan for the gas works, because it's the same population. Actually, it should be fewer in the gas company's low-income plan, because some people do have oil heat, some people do use kerosene, and there are a handful of people who use electric heat. I'm sure somebody's going to point out, well, someone has a wood stove. Yes, there are always anomalies. You can get down to the 1/10, 1%. But on average, there are more water consumers than there are gas consumers. And the same number of low-income people are in the city, whether they're gas users or water users. So you would think common sense would tell you that the water department would look at how many people are in the gas works, PGW's low-income plan, and say we should be at that number or higher. The water department was unable to do that. They were only able to get 17,000 people enrolled and had a constant turnover. So the water department acknowledged that they were doing a very poor job. One of the problems was, should consumers have to say, should they have to affirmatively say, I want to be in this program? And because the water department is so isolated from the community, doesn't do appropriate outreach and doesn't want to do appropriate outreach, because there would really be outrage for people complaining about the rates. So it's in the water department's interest to make sure that the community has no connection, no relationship with the water department, which means the water department, when it says you can sign up for this program, it's not believable. So the rules and regulations for the water department, where you have to get an affirmative response. Someone has to say, yes, I wanted to be in the TAP program. It wasn't working. They only had 17,000. The idea is there should be 56,000 people in it. So what did the water department do? Well, on February 13th, they started automatically enrolling people. And again, that's not a bad thing. The problem is the rules and regulations didn't allow them to do that. The water department, with hubris and arrogance, decided the rules and regulations are for poor and working people. The laws are for someone else. They're not for the water department. And they said, we don't care about what the rules and regulations are. We're just going to start enrolling people. And because we're enrolling all these people, now we're going to have to raise the rates on everybody else to pay for the people who are automatic enrolling. But they got caught. The law didn't allow them to do what they were doing. When it was pointed out to them that they weren't allowed to do it, they started on February 13th. On March 27th, they filed with the city a change in the regulations. So from February 13th to March 27th, they were illegally enrolling people because they didn't follow the rules and regulations. They changed the rules and regulations that became effective on April 29th. So 2 months after they started the enrollment, they changed the rules. And the gist of it is, if they had permission, if the regulations allowed them to do that, it's like from A Few Good Men. Why give 2 orders? Why do you have to change the rules and regulations if you're already allowed to do it? And the answer is, they're not allowed to do it. So we go through the hearings. I participate in the hearings, and just like at SEPTA, one of the reasons I become a formal participant is because I have the ability to ask questions that as a member of the media, I would not get an answer to. So I was raising the questions of who should pay for the cost of the low-income plan, and who should bear the cost of poverty in our society, and shouldn't we have the most efficient programs we possibly can have? Shouldn't we make sure that the cost of running these programs is as low as possible? So the ratepayers public advocate answered my points, and these are direct quotes from their responses. They say enrollment costs are not recovered through the TAP plan, are irrelevant to the TAP rates to be determined in this proceeding. So again, the public advocate's position is it doesn't matter how much it costs the water department to enroll people. We shouldn't worry about that. We shouldn't look at that. We shouldn't try and be efficient. Then they say ultimately ratepayer funding of low-income customer assistance program is not intended to serve as an anti-poverty program. So they're saying this low-income plan isn't supposed to alleviate poverty. I don't know what it's for if it's not supposed to alleviate poverty, but their position is it's not supposed to alleviate poverty. So I should not be able to ask about who should pay for it. And finally, they write, although other resources for low-income customers could aid in paying their water bills, they're not supporting of that. And this again becomes a question of why would anyone in their right mind suggest that we ought to put a surcharge, an extra tax on milk to cover the cost of moms who are in the WIC program? Would anyone suggest we put a tax on food so we can pay for the SNAP program? It's a ludicrous idea. Almost all of us who think about this for more than 2 minutes say poverty is caused by the structure of our society, not by other poor people. The cost and the burden of paying for these programs, these very necessary programs, should be borne by the entire structure of our society, not just ratepayers. But it's a little worse than that, because that's a philosophical point, and other people say, including the public advocate, well, that's a political fight and they don't want to get involved in a political fight. They don't want to have to win the argument. They just want to collect the money and nobody knows about it. But here's what they write about overhead costs and the cost of the program. Again, this is from their direct filing. Quote, the public advocate, now this is the people the rate board hires. There's no relationship to the public, and even though they call themselves the public advocate. The public advocate respectfully submits that although irrelevant to the TAP-R rates, the board and the public generally should not, based on all the information discussed herein, find the TAP administrative costs are concerning. So they're saying we should not be concerned about how efficient a program is. And it's when we get to the next slide, or the next couple of slides, we'll see it's because they collude with the water department to settle all of the rate cases. And they don't want people to come show up and say, hey, what's going on? To underlie that point, this year, every body, every political body, every authority in the Delaware Valley has gone back to in-person meetings. And for poor and working people, in-person meetings have a very real promise. It's the promise of showing up with a sign. It's the promise of networking and sharing information with other poor and working people who are struggling. It's the promise that we can chant. It's the promise that we can picket. It's the problem that we cannot be removed easily when we want to make our point. But the public advocate, the ratepayers advocate, the water department, and the hearing examiner all decided to eliminate the public hearings and to make them virtual and make them at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning. So if you don't have computer access, if you don't have internet access, you wouldn't find out about it, because the only way you were told was through emails. And it's very difficult for people who have working class jobs, minimum wage jobs, to get off to go to a public hearing. So a concentrated effort to stop the picketing, to stop the demonstrating, to stop the chanting, so that the ratepayers advocate, the hearing examiner and the water department could do whatever they wanted. There's a settlement agreement that's been put forward, and this is from the counsel for the water department. The department and the ratepayers advocate, the public advocate, found common ground for the purposes of the settlement. The department and the advocate have agreed to the TAPR rates. The TAPR surcharges are expressed in a dollar amount per 1,000 cubic feet. It is accepted industry practice to use surcharges customers assistance programs. Mr. Haver is critical of the existence of the TAPR surcharge because the surcharges increases the financial burden on Philadelphia's using water and wastewater services. Now, again, the attack on the point that paying for low-income plans should be from the entire society, not just water ratepayers, is attacked and said that's not a reasonable thing. But what I want to make clear from this point is the water department supports the public advocate, the ratepayers advocate, because the ratepayers advocate always settles. And it's a Potemkin village. It's a shell game. The water department asks for slightly more than what they want. To get a bunch of money, they hire the politically aligned consultants. The ratepayers advocate gets a nice paycheck. He gets to hire a politically active consultant to go together. Now, they say it's not secret. I'm not supposed to use the word secret because they're negotiating in private, which is different from their point of view than secret. But they're negotiating in private. And what a shock. Every year for the last 4 years, they agree on something. And what they agree on is raising the rates on the rest of us. When I raise these issues, when I say the ratepayers advocate doesn't meet with the public, doesn't do what's necessary to get public input, actually prepared its testimony before a single member of the public is heard, who defends the ratepayers advocate? Who defends the rate board's advocate? Who defends these people? Well, it's the water department that defends them, not other consumers. There's no consumer out there who's defending them, but the water department's lawyer defends them, saying Mr. Haver is critical of the hearing officer and the public advocate. He questions the fairness of the hearing officer. He also questions whether the public advocate represents the interests of the small consumers. The water department submits that all of the criticisms are misplaced. Well, if you're the water department, you get rate increase after rate increase after rate increase after rate increase, all with the agreement of the ratepayers advocate and the stamp from the hearing examiner. Wouldn't you defend the hearing examiner and the ratepayers advocate because they always give you what you want? Now, we're running out of time. I really want to hear about the Phillies because it's very good news. But there's a settlement proposal, and the settlement proposal is a collusion between the ratepayers advocate and the Philadelphia Water Department to overlook how the water department violated its own rules and regulations. If the hearing examiner approves the settlement, what she will be doing is setting up 2 tiers of justice. Whenever a normal person, a member of the public says, well, why can't we pay for this program by collecting on the water liens on abandoned buildings? The hearing examiner says, we can't ask that question because the rules and regulations don't allow us to ask that question. But if she approves the settlement, what she's going to say is it's all right for the water department to violate the rules and regulations. It's just not all right for poor and working people. In addition, it's really 2 tiers. It's not equal justice under the law. If ratepayers have to go ahead and follow the rules and regulations, the water department should have to do it. And approving this settlement is saying to the water department, you don't have to be regulated. You don't have to follow the rules and regulations. You do whatever you want because you're rich, you're powerful, and there's nobody here to stop you. So we will see, and I'll report back if and when the hearing examiner makes a ruling. My guess is the hearing examiner is going to, again, try and cover up the malfeasance of the water department, not call attention to the fact that they were enrolling people when the regulations said they couldn't, and they're going to raise rates. One last quick point. How much are we going to pay under the settlement agreement? Well, they don't include that in the settlement agreement. There's no dollar amount. No one knows. Again, if you tell people how much the settlement agreement means in the way of higher rates, they may object to it. So what does the water department and the ratepayers advocate do? They bury that number. They don't tell it. They don't announce it. They don't print it. So I did the calculation, and I readily admit I could be wrong because it's very hard to provide an accurate estimate of how high the bills are going to go when they don't provide the numbers. But based on the numbers they did provide, each one of us in the city of Philadelphia, if the ratepayers advocate and the water department get their way, our bills will go up not by the 14% that the water department asked for in the beginning, but by 12.5%. The ratepayers advocate is going to say, look at how significant a victory it is for them. And of course, it's just a shell game. The water department never wanted it all. They're happy with the 12.5% increase. And we know that because they settled for that in a closed door settlement discussion with the ratepayers advocate and the hearing examiner. If you read through her filing and all of her answers, she doesn't want to make a decision which she could be held accountable to. So instead, what she does is she says, I want you to settle if you can. So a hearing examiner who doesn't want to decide, a public advocate that doesn't want to advocate, and a water department that doesn't want to follow the rules and regulations. As I said, Denise, if you turned off the lights in your studio again, you would be just like the rest of us water consumers. Thank you very much. Anxious to hear from Chris about how well the Phillies are doing. Good news with the franchise agreement, and good news with the Phillies kind of balances out what I'm telling about the water rates.
Well, the one thing I just want to say, Lance, every time we talk about the water rates, there's something strange that's been done behind the scenes. And this time there's a couple of things that to me don't make any sense.
Well, I am kind of waiting. The majority leader, Catherine Gilmore Richardson in council, did such a phenomenal job with SEPTA, forcing SEPTA to hold hearings. People who came out changed dramatically what was going to happen. But for some reason, they're silent on the water hearings. Nobody, no council person has raised the issue of my constituents can't afford another rate increase. Where are the public, why wouldn't you have public meetings? Here's the majority leader saying to SEPTA, you've got to hold more public meetings. You've got to go out to the public and explain what's going on. And yet the water department doesn't have to hold a single public meeting. They can do it all virtually. And I will assure you that as I was trying to question the consultants for the water department and for the public advocate, the hearing examiner, of course, censored me, turned me off, which she would not be able to do in a public session.
Yeah. All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that. There's always more to talk about with this stuff, so we're looking forward to that. And thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Now let's turn to something a little more fun.
Mhm.
Every once in a while, we like to switch it up a little bit and bring on Chris Murray to talk sports with us. And there's a lot to talk about right now, Chris. How are you doing? Oh, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you, honey.
I think you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. No, between I don't know, but between all the tons of papers I'm grading and all that, the Phillies have been playing really well. They've won 5 straight, and I gotta say, one of the best stories of this year has been Ranger Suarez.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a guy who last year was more like a third or fourth, maybe a fourth or fifth starter. He has solidly elevated himself to being a third starter for this team. And yesterday he did something. I mean, he did something really special yesterday. And yesterday he had 10 strikeouts. And he improved his record to 9-0. He lowered his ERA from 1.37 to 1.36 through 10 starts. Now, he is the first pitcher. He's the first pitcher to start 9-0 with a sub-ERA record through 10 starts since Hall of Fame San Francisco Giants pitcher Juan Marichal. And the only other American/National League pitchers to do so when earned runs became official in 1912 are Hall of Famer Walter Johnson and Cy Falkenberg. Not to be confused with Cy Young. Cy Falkenberg both in 1913. That's historic. And his 1.36 ERA is the third lowest in franchise history through 10 starts. Only Grover Cleveland Alexander, another Hall of Famer, did the same thing. He had a 1.24 earned run average in 1916 and a 1.31 in 1915. So there's a historic thing with that with the Phillies. And the Phillies are just pitching well. I mean, do the Phillies have a big three in Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola? I think they do, and I think they push each other. And the one thing that struck me about Suarez this year is that now you got three pitchers in the starting rotation who can give you good 7-8 innings and whatnot beyond the usual 6, and that's important to keep the bullpen together. Now the Phillies have one of the best records in Major League Baseball right now. They're in first place. The only thing though is that last year this team started 22 and 29. I think they did so the previous year and played better, in the second half of the season. You have to hope that the Phillies, because now we're in the month of June, and when we're in the month of June, that's when you start. We're headed toward the All-Star break. We're a month away from heading towards the All-Star break. And to me, this is where the race emerges. This is where everything in Major League Baseball comes together. This is where you figure out who the contenders are at this point in the year. And so what the Phillies have to do is just maintain what they're doing. And they're playing a lot of ball clubs that aren't really good right now. But when it comes down to June and all that, they'll be playing some things. They'll be in Baltimore in a couple of weeks to play a very hot Baltimore Orioles team. So, we're gonna see how good this team is. But the thing you worry about, and in terms of the last few years, is that if you have the best record in baseball coming into the playoffs, and I know we're a long, long, long way from October, but the danger sometimes when you have the best record in baseball coming into the playoffs, and dating back to since the expanded playoff era, it's becoming very rare that a team that has the best record in the league or in throughout baseball, it's very rare that they win the World Series. It doesn't happen often. So
Right.
We'll see how this shows how it takes itself out.
And you got to fear the wild card teams because they're coming in hot.
Right.
So I got to ask you, Chris, what changed from last year to this year? Because I think it's largely the same teams, except Reese Hoskins isn't here, who I thought was a fantastic player on the field and off the field. He was another bat. They didn't really replace that bat in the lineup. So what is it about this year that's gotten this team into this position?
I'm going to say we've had Bryce Harper since day one. Last year, Bryce Harper missed a lot of the season, so you got him into the lineup. Alec Boehm is becoming a better hitter now. He leads baseball, and he has 44 RBIs. He's hitting. There are guys in that lineup. They're right. He's a right-handed bat. He's hitting, and so you got guys in that lineup that are starting to hit. Heck, even Johan Rojas is hitting a little bit. But the thing is that you've got guys in that lineup that are hitting, and like I said, you got Bryce Harper there. It makes a difference to have Bryce Harper at the beginning of the season. It's just he's that guy. I mean, Kyle Schwarber's hitting better. So you got guys in that lineup, that are doing well. So I think, like I said, Rob Thompson, this is a veteran team. And, Rob Thompson is an easygoing kind of guy. He knows how to push the buttons. He knows how to get those guys going. But I do think the difference has been pitching. I do think that, you have a good solid third starter in that lineup. And I think once Taijuan Walker gets going, I think Walker will give you a good 6 or 7 innings as well. So you got guys in the starting rotation that can take you beyond the normal 6 innings and all that. And as an old baseball fan, I'm not necessarily a fan of that 6 innings is a quality start. I'm old school. I believe in starters going into the 9th inning if they're still hot. But It's just like I said, it's the way baseball is now.
Now, among the things that you're doing at and I know that you're probably getting ready for like the football season and stuff like that, but you're also still promoting your book. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that and I guess where people can find it?
Well, right now, you would have to go to Linus Books, and I can give you guys that link. I am going to be going out into the community soon, but name of my book is First Draft, a collection of stories chronicling race, sports, and social justice, and it's basically focusing in on articles that I've written, especially in the last 4 years, especially dating back from about maybe really going back to when I was at the Philadelphia Tribune, talking, and I did a collection of stories about some of the things I did covering sports and social justice in the 21st century, and that's, to me it was important to put that out there because I wanted to talk about the fact that athletes in this era have basically been speaking out on a lot of things. And I also wanted to capture the sense that there are some things that are happening in the world of sports, even in the here and now, that we have to be concerned about. And there's a lot of racial issues in sports, a lot of social justice issues in sports. And, the whole thing, I was inspired by it. I was inspired to write the book because I was teaching a course at Temple University on the history and politics of the Black athlete, and I couldn't really find it. There's not a lot of textbook material out there, for this subject. So I went out and I started looking up my old stories, and I figured out between the Tribune, the Griot, and a lot of places I've written for, and my old blog, and blog still exists, but my blog, I've written a lot of stuff, questioning the racial politics of sports, and I think. And that just inspired me. I said I could put this in the book, and that's exactly what I did.
Now, in terms of baseball is kind of sort of always has always been a good news, bad news thing when it comes to social justice. On the one hand, you had the start of the civil rights movement with Jackie Robinson integrating the major leagues, but on the other hand, you have a system that does two things, and both are pretty bad. One, it basically exploits Latin American countries by bringing 14-year-old kids into these baseball camps where if they show promise and they make it to the pros, great, but if not, they haven't necessarily been given the skills that they need to survive beyond that. And also because of this, or they've decided that instead of trying to keep baseball teams in the inner cities in places like Philadelphia up and running so that you can get the next group of inner city major leaguers, they would rather do this thing with these baseball camps. Now, for example, I was out in Kensington today, and I was talking to a gentleman who runs a boxing gym across from a school that is now closed. And he was talking about how there was no baseball field for the kids in his neighborhood. Now, as someone who looks at social justice in sports, do you think that, now sure, MLB, to be fair, has started the RBI program, but could baseball be doing more?
They could be doing more in terms of trying to fund the little leagues that are out there. I was talking to, and for some reason his name escapes me, the gentleman who ran the Monarchs, the team that included the little league team with
the Taney Dragons.
Yeah, the Taney Dragons and the young girl Monet Davis, and he was very critical. And matter of fact, when I interviewed him at the Jackie Robinson thing that we had with WRD at ShopRite, he was critical of Major League Baseball because he says that they weren't doing enough to support these little league programs. And plus, they need to get equipment to the kids. Baseball equipment is expensive. And, but then again, people can get equipment for football uniforms and all that, So I think that Major League Baseball does need to do more if they want to try to find the next great kid because people just aren't, black people, on one hand, aren't necessarily interested in the sport, even though there's some great players that are out there that are doing well, like J.P. Crawford is doing well in the Philly system right now. So you really have to, I think that MLB has to make that commitment. But I'm going to say, you may disagree with me, but there are some things, I'm still trying to figure out, as you know, when did baseball all of a sudden become boring? I don't see baseball as boring. For all the times I watched baseball in pennant races and in the playoffs where my team was struggling to hit and all that, and I'm hanging on every pitch. And somehow it has gotten out within the community that somehow the sport is boring. And I'm trying to figure out, how did that happen? What was that about?
And one of the other things about having younger people play, it's not just for them to maybe move into the big leagues at some point, but I think isn't it just to keep them interested? Because if you play when you're younger, you're more likely to be a fan when you're older, and you can spend the money to go to the games.
Mm-hmm.
Are you concerned that as time goes on, maybe that fan base erodes because kids aren't getting into it when they're younger? It's one of the few things you can take from childhood to adulthood, and are we starting to miss that?
And on some levels we are, in a sense that when I was doing some work with Concerned Black Men Cares about maybe 10, 15 years ago. We took some kids to the ballpark, and it was just trying to explain to them, the ins and outs of the game. And part of it not having, there has to, a lot of times you got to have older men around talk about the game. And there are a lot of baseball fans in this city there are a lot of people that I know of who love baseball. So it's a question of, but it's also an economic question as well, because see, with football and basketball, your path to economic riches are a lot faster, because baseball, when you get up there, if you're really good in high school or college, you got to go and you have to go through A ball, then another extension of A ball, and then double A ball, and then triple A. But really, a lot of times they pull guys from double A, or they pull guys from college to kind of make that swift transition into Major League Baseball. And it's kind of hard on some levels. But once you get there, once you get there and you're great at it and you're good at it, that's when that money comes through. That's when it comes in, and it's a longer lasting career as well.
It's kind of like,
we only have about a minute left.
Mhm. Well, I was just saying, Paul Skeens from the Pittsburgh Pirates, who was just literally drafted last year, is kind of setting the league on fire right now.
Used to be a league for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And and there are guys who are good at that though too. That's the thing. If you're that good, they'll get you up there. If you can help the ball club, in that situation, they'll get you there. But at the same time, I would like to see more black kids play in the sport, because baseball is fun. Baseball is a fun sport. That's the sport that if I had to do it over again in life, I would have become a better baseball player than I was a football player. I was a good football player, but I was small.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We're going to have you back again soon. Hopefully this streak keeps going for the Phillies. So thank you all so much for being with us, and we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.